Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and today we're going to jump into another Europa Universalis V dev diary, or as they are officially called because nobody wants to admit that this is EU5, Tinto Talks. Today we're going to jump into the newest one that deals with proximity with control and maritime presence. All very interesting topics because they will be vital for administering your realm and your empire, which of course is very important as well because the way they are implemented here is something that I don't think has ever been done in a Paradox game outside of mods. For example, in Mario and Texas, which we just keep talking about because it is so relevant, and yet Johan says he's never played it. Anyway, before we jump into that, there is actually something of note here that Johan also posted with regard to last week's dev diary, this being in relation to estates. What you can see right here are all of the estates that were discussed and talked about in the last dev diary. It was said that there would be no custom estates, that there was nothing special going on. I said back then that I get that decision. Johan was right, of course, that it is much easier to balance this if you have just one setup worldwide, but at the same time, well, you know, we have this problem in Victoria 3 where it might feel a bit sameish. That has been changed a lot in Victoria 3 with a lot more custom interest groups, but of course in EU5 it seemed as though we were going to get one thing that had to fit everyone. That seems to have changed. What we have right here is Crown, Amir, Ulama, Burghers, Commoners and Dhimmi. So we are effectively looking at the clergy that belongs to the Muslim faith and then the Dhimmi, so the non-believers. This is a unique setup, and it has been said by Johan as well that there may be more changes coming up for example, the Cossacks and I assume for other countries as well. Which basically means he moved far away from his original position that estates would be the same in every tag no matter what. Now listen, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of this. I see this and I say, well, no matter what happens, a Muslim tag will now feel and play different than, you know, any Catholic or Protestant or whatever tag. But, of course, it will be much harder to actually balance this, so let's hope that they figure it out. It is nice to see that they are moving from the originally established position, and let's see what they can indeed deliver. This was just the news about estates. We are going to see custom, we are going to see unique estates. Let's see exactly what they do. Alright, so far so good. Let's jump into the actual content of this dev diary by talking about the three concepts that matter so much as they do: control, proximity, and maritime presence. To do this, however, we have to start by talking about locations themselves. Not every location on the map is the same, especially not in a game of such scope as Project Caesar. By default, every ownable land location is a rural settlement, but there are two upgrades to it that can be done. First, you can found a town in a location, which allows you to increase the population capacity of the location and allows for a completely different set of buildings than a rural settlement. Finally, you can grant city rights to a town, which allows for even further advantages. Now, you may wonder, why don't I make every location into cities? Besides the cost and the population requirement, there's also the drawback that each of them tend to reduce your food production, while also adding more nobles, clergy, and lots of burghers to your country. Stockholm, Dublin, and Belgrade are examples of towns at the start of the game, while cities include places like Beijing, Alexandria, and Paris. This right here, as interesting as it is, honestly is pretty basic, especially if we compare it to Imperator Rome 2.0. I think Imperator Rome actually has one more level, Metropolis, but in general this is exactly how it works, even down to, well, a city and so on producing no food and then needing you to import it. This is of course quite interesting because it means that population centers, much like we know it in Imperator Rome, will see a very distinct form, both in the economic setup, in the food production setup, and at the end of the day in the population setup as well. Alright, so that is related to locations themselves. And then right here we have a gorgeous map. We can see Sweden with its possessions in Finland as well, and then of course the Baltic states right there, with Denmark, the Livonian Order, and so on having their fair share. This is a super cool map. Let's start with the very basics. In white we have Stockholm. This is the capital. Then directly coming out of Stockholm are roads, and these roads aren't just good for your military. No, they will also make it so that your control level of the locations away from your capital and further away from your capital will be positively impacted, meaning your control, we're going to talk about the details of control in a second, will be higher there. This means roads, different from Imperator, now have more use, and I gotta tell ya, I am very much looking forward to that. We can also see that the west of Sweden and then, well, most of Finland are pretty low when it comes to control gain that you have in total, which makes sense. It's difficult to administer an empire, and it is more difficult to administer an empire that is overseas. I would guess that in the west of Finland there, the port is exactly where the brightest yellow spot is. Even then, with that port, it is just yellow. It isn't even green. Neither is any of the Swedish islands, indicating that overseas, at the very least at the start of the game, is quite difficult to administer. The impact of this will be huge, and I'm so happy that Johan goes into the details here in the dev diary going forward. So without further ado, after this beautiful map, let's take a look at what this actually means. How do you gain control, how do you lose it, and how do you maintain it? Every location that you own has a control value, which is primarily determined by the proximity it has to the capital, or another source of authority in your country. There are only a few things that can increase it above the proximity impact, but many things that can decrease it further. This is probably the most important value you have, as it determines how much value you can get out of a location, as it directly impacts how much you can tax the population in that location, and the amount of levies they will contribute when called. A lack of control reduces the crown power that you can gain from its population, while it also reduces the potential manpower and sailors that you can get, and weakens the market attraction of your own markets, making them likelier to belong to foreign markets if they have too low control. This means if you have an empire and no control over it, you won't even have it in your market, you won't even be in a position where you can get troops from it, and most importantly, you will not get any crown power from it. This is amazing. I made a joke tweet because one of my friends on Discord basically said that, hey, if you blob wildly in any EU game, there should be somebody that spawns in your room and just strikes you dead because it's so annoying and it shouldn't be happening and it is immersion breaking. Seeing control right here makes it so that yeah, we have a corresponding factor right here. You can conquer anywhere in the world, but it will mean nothing to you. Natural expansion along rivers, along the coast, and so on will be beneficial for you. And I think that stuff is amazing to see. From the looks of it, control will indeed be the most important factor and of course impacted by proximity and so on. What we have right here is so-called effective control in a screenshot. The control of Kalmar is currently 56.15% and it changes by plus 0.2 each month and can reach a maximum of 58.2, while currently having the following effects. And now take a look at this. Crown power minus 43%, so the crown power that you can get out of this location. Monthly sailors and monthly manpower also down by minus 43% because, well, yep, you are not pulling those out. Levy size plus 56%, so I assume it has a base size, and then above that basically just goes to the maximum of plus 100%. Market protection plus 28%. And last but not least, this also gives access to 56% of the potential tax base of Kalmar. Meaning, the further you move away from Stockholm, the further you move away from Kalmar, the worse will it get for you because, yeah, you won't have any control over it. Alright, so far so good. We now know that control has a massive impact on how much you can actually utilize your empire. But of course, there's also proximity that has been mentioned earlier. Let's talk about what proximity means. It is basically a distance to capital value, where traveling on the open sea is extremely costly. We saw that in the screenshot as well. Proximity is costly over land, but along coastlines where you have high maritime presence, you can keep up a high proximity much further. Tracing proximity along a major river reduces the proximity cost a fair bit, and if you build a road network, that will further reduce the proximity costs. There are buildings that you can build, like a bailiff, that will act as a smaller proximity source, but that has the slight drawback of adding more nobles to the location, and with that a cost in food for them. So proximity is a general measurement, and how big its impact is something that you can influence, based on, for example, technology, based on whether you have ports, whether you have maritime presence, whether you have roads, whether you have a bailiff. Meaning proximity never goes away, but whether it plays a role for the administration of your immediate realm, that is something you can influence. Now, what was also mentioned here was maritime presence. Let's take a look at what the dev diary says with regards to that. In every coastal location around your locations, or where you have special buildings, you have a maritime presence. This is slowly built up over time based on your ports and other buildings that you have in adjacent locations. Placing a navy in the location helps improve it quicker, but blockades and pirates will decrease it quickly, making it absolutely vital to protect your coastlines in a war, or you will suffer the consequences for a long time, since it goes down very quickly and up very slowly. As mentioned earlier, the maritime presence impacts the proximity calculations, but it also impacts the power of your merchants in the market the sea zone is a part of. Right here, we can see one such thing. This is Gotland's half, and it is in the Riga market. You can see that it is a narrows. I assume this is basically the terrain for any naval combat. And then we can see that both Kingdom of Sweden and the Hanseatic League is present, which is super exciting, considering, well, what does that mean? The Hanseatic League Apparently, it does not mean that this is just a renamed Lübeck tag. I hope that we can have pretty dynamic confederations between different tags, leading to names such as the Hanseatic League. Anyway, we can see 100, and this will grow at different rates for both of these nations, so Sweden and the Hanseatic League. I assume this is your general maritime presence, and then 23.87 and 31.07 is probably something like your market share. At least that is my interpretation. Now, this was the dev diary itself, but as always, Johan answers extremely exhaustively in the dev diary comments right here, so we're going to talk about that as well. Before we do that, let's recapitulate for just 1 second. We have our realm, and within that realm we of course have proximity distances. That is based on the fact that that is how geography works. They will impact us depending on how present we are, whether we are able to build roads and so on, whether we have maritime presence in the location adjacent to our land locations. And all of that will then impact what our control of a location looks like, which significantly impacts just how much we are getting out of a location, both in actual resources, in manpower, but also in crown power, making it so that a location that is isolated from us, at least from the looks of it, will generate a state power, but not crown power. And that could be difficult. Now, this is a super exciting thing to see. I honestly didn't think that we would see this because, well, outside of Victoria 3's markets and outside of Mayo and Texas, something like this I don't think has ever been done to this detail. It's a really exciting thing. Now, I will say that I am worried about one particular issue that will come up as we now walk through Johan's responses in the dev diary. You will see what I mean when we get there, but I will say that I hope that they can address this. This shouldn't be unsolvable. It's just something that definitely concerns me. Right at the start, Johan clarifies here that indeed, in the very early game, it will be very beneficial to have plenty of subjects, making it so that your proximity range won't be an issue, since those vessels have their own capitals and can administer things directly. Whether you then get a lot of money from your vessel out of the money that they directly collect is something that I assume is dealt with on the liege to vassal level. In general, EU as a series, I think, is really strong about vassal management, so I'm not too concerned by that at all. When it comes to proximity and how you can impact it, he basically also says that indeed roads can be built and then techs are improving most of it as well. Now, I will say that I wish this wasn't directly tied to techs, but rather buildings that are, for example, unlocked by tech, but in general, of course, it makes sense. You get a new tech and you are able to administer your realm better, that is a direct consequence right there, makes sense to me. He also indeed confirms that locations can be depopulated, which shouldn't be too surprising. This was a functionality in Imperator Rome, it's super cool, you can burn everything down, and yeah, that terrain will be terrible afterwards. Now, here is a big one, and one that worries me, like I mentioned before. What happens if a territory is an exclave? Will it have any control at all without a bailiff, or just a big penalty? With no bailiff or something similar, you will not have control. I think that is kind of worrisome. Now, hear me out. Again, there are solutions to this, but let me paint you a picture. If you are Austria and you are in possession of the Netherlands, hopefully there are vassals that you can found. I hope that they will have something like a dynamic vassal tag system, where whenever you hold something, you can release it no matter what is going on. But if you can't do that, then, well, good luck, because you will not get anything out of the Netherlands, since that has zero control. The other issue that really opens itself up, imagine, for example, you are fighting France, you're looking at Paris, and you're saying to yourself, okay, wait a minute, what if I just conquer locations around Paris, and all of a sudden, all of France has 0% control? Does that work that way? Can we stop it to some degree? Will the AI react? Are they capable of, for example, moving their capital? Are they capable of not doing such peace deals? Are they capable of releasing vassals dynamically if they notice I have 0% control here? I don't know. But I'm going to be honest with you, this is really concerning to me. This is one of those things where there's an easy path to have the AI collapse in on itself completely undisturbed. Because, yeah, they just got completely cut off. Now, again, like I said, there are issues to deal with this. For example, maybe you make it so that, I don't know, across 2, 3, or 4 locations you still reach, even if you're not directly tied to it. But as it stands, at least from what has been said here, I'm definitely concerned by this. If we can take out the AI this way, if the AI could take out itself this way if they really screw up, or even if I just claim something that feels like logical terrain for me to take, completely cutting off my enemy, that would kind of suck, because that's a huge manipulation. I'm taking power away that shouldn't be the case. If we think about this historically speaking, if we think about, for example, Brandenburg and Brandenburg-Bayreuth, so there was territory held here in Bavaria by the Hohenzollern, and it's not like they didn't have access to it. It wasn't like they had zero control over it. Rather, it was in a location where, you look around and you say to yourself, okay, well, we live in Brandenburg, but we can still administer this. It's fine, because in the Holy Roman Empire, even if I don't border it directly, that's cool. Let's be real, the Holy Roman Empire was nothing if not just, people owning land that was completely disconnected. Either way, I hope you get my drift here. I am kind of concerned by this idea that unless I have a direct connection, be it overseas or be it, for example, via a land connection right there, that I will just have 0% control, because there seem to be edge cases here that could just sink this entire ship. Now, something that he does confirm, and that is really cool, that if you have a lack of control, indeed, the money not taxed will go to the estates. It won't just evaporate, it won't just go away, it will make your enemies stronger. You love to hear it. He also confirms that Norse mythology will still exist. 1337, I'm pretty sure this is like close to the end, like there shouldn't be much of it anymore. I wonder whether we can properly revive it. It sounds like an insane and maybe insanely stupid, but nonetheless extremely fun run that we gotta check out. But let's be real, he's Swedish, of course he's gonna have Norse mythology in the game. Now, next up, something that I love to see, something that EU4 is already pretty good about, and that is the question of colonial nations. Will they be present in the game? I imagine it will be very difficult to maintain control of locations on different continents. Yeah, they are something you actively want to set up, even if you're not forced to. I like this idea a lot, which is also why I said, just for the record, I am concerned about the issue of cut-off proximity and such. But if indeed Austria just has to release the Netherlands as a vassal, I would be on board with this. That sounds cool to me. Having a vassal up there that might, be shuffled around between different enemies if they take it in a peace deal and such, definitely sounds cool. Wanting to create colonial nations just so that they can have proximity and administrate themselves effectively, definitely a positive for me. Johan also confirms that rivers cannot be navigated, which means that there won't be river navies, and which also means that there won't be river raiding. I personally am fine with this. Obviously there were some fleets at this point, but Johan also said that Venice won't be an island, and Venice most certainly is an island, even if very, very small, that could be blockaded. I actually read this not too long ago, that Venice itself got blockaded when they were rebelling against the Austrians, even in the period of the Victoria series, so in the 19th century, which should make it possible to blockade Venice. But if we can't blockade Venice in this game, then yeah, rivers are obviously out of the question. He also goes further into the details of locations and cities and towns and so on. He says that it will take several years to upgrade a town to a city, and that only so it can allow all other things, meaning you don't just instantly get benefits. This also, not too surprising if you've played Imperator Rome. Imperator Rome excelled when it came to being a civilization builder, being a city builder, and so on. So this was already there. It worked really well. I'm really happy to see it come back for sure. Two more statements, out of which we can't really make too much just because, well, we don't have any details. He says that manpower is 100% connected to pops. This already isn't a surprise, of course, but whether particular pops are tied to particular regiments, for example, that's a good question. Maybe that's the case, maybe that's not the case. It would be cool to see, but might be a bit too much to keep track of for a game that runs for 400 to 500 years. He has also been asked, does a lower control level cause a higher chance of rebellion? I guess through the lower crown power gained. He says there is a correlation there, but low control in itself is not the reason for rebellion. I assume it's just down to the fact that you can't suppress rebellion all too well if you have no control over the region. I am really curious whether, for example, estates will have regional strongholds, so just fundamentally, they will maybe even push down your control just based on the fact that they are very powerful somewhere. I'm very curious about this, but no details yet, sadly, so we can't really answer that question. He also does confirm that there is a 99.99% likelihood of Cossacks as an estate coming in. They do have a sprint for adding content to that region this spring, which honestly is amazing news. The fact that at launch EU5 will have content for the Cossacks, hey, maybe all my worries about EU4 being a content behemoth, a leviathan if you will, maybe they have no reason to be around because they seem to be doing a lot of work there already. Another question that came up was this one. Why do we need navies when it seems like maritime presence always ticks upwards anyway? I'm patient, I rather have money and take a couple of more years to fill up. I would rather if it trended towards an equilibrium and you had to actively use navies to keep it at 100%. Johan says navies help with A, making it tick up faster, B, make sure pirates are dealt with, and C, making sure you actually have a maritime presence during or after a war. So, very important, which I'm very happy to see. Navies should be front and center. And I say that as somebody, if you've watched the channel, that does not care about boats at all, but I love navies, and this seems to be the right context. EU4, quite frankly, already has an okay Navy system, when it comes to at least how they use the mission system and so on. I hope that we're going to see mission-based gameplay for navies here primarily, because that system does work really well when you are administering a realm that is worldwide, you know? It makes it pretty easy to deal with and is very effective. And this was the last response so far. If Johan leaves more responses, especially for example for my concern right here, then I will let you know in the comments, in the pinned comment. But this is everything we know so far. I'm gonna be honest with you, outside of the edge case, the potential pitfall of the system, if you are indeed cut off from your capital location, I really like this. I think building an empire needs to feel like building an empire, which means you taking new territory can't leave you in the same level of control as you are, for example, at home, right in the background of your castle. I really like this concept. I really hope that it accounts for the weakness that, you know, again, potentially lives within it. But fundamentally, my god, I love that EU5 is actually taking this concept and running with it. Because, yeah, if you want an empire building simulator, that is how you do it. Frankly, Imperator Rome also needed this, but hey, that game is dead forever. Folks, let me know what you think about this. I'm really excited for this, although slightly worried about this one element right there. And I'll leave it right here. I'll see you later, alligator.